Hey guys. This is part 2 of What If Naruto Lost His Memories. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 5. Hinata was in the middle of giving Jiraiya a bath after dinner when someone began pounding relentlessly on the front door. Naruto had been in the bedroom, examining some of the photos on the dresser, trying to find memories that matched when the pounding startled him. He was already heading for the door when Hinata called him from the hallway bathroom. Naruto poked his head around the door and stumbled upon a disaster zone. The entire bathroom was drenched, and Hinata herself looked like she had joined Jiraiya in the bath. Dressed in a dark blue tank top and shorts, Naruto caught himself admiring the way the wet shirt and shorts clung to her form. Even her hair, which had been tied up in a neat loose bun, looked pretty as a few stray wet locks hung down around her face. "I'm sorry, but could you answer that?" she asked, trying to catch Jiraiya's little arms as he splashed at the water. "I think I look like a drowned rat, and I need to get him out of here." Forcing his brain to focus on something other than Hinata's body, Naruto nodded his head and quickly fled the bathroom, scolding himself for thinking about Hinata like the pervy sage. The knocking still hadn't stopped by the time he reached the door, and Naruto vaguely wondered how sore the person's knuckles were before he pulled it open and found himself face to face with Hinata Hyuga. "Is it true?" she asked, before he could even think to say hello. "Huh!" was his eloquent response as he blinked owlishly at her. "Is my sister here?" Hanabi asked instead, quickly changing tactics. Yeah, Naruto answered, glad he knew at least one right answer, and opened the door a little wider to let her in. She was just giving Jiraiya a bath. "Hanabi?" Both turned to look across the living room. Hinata stood at the end of the hallway, holding a towel swaddled Jiraiya, who waved at his aunt happily, with a look of complete shock on her face. "What are you doing here? I thought you weren't supposed to get back for another 3 days?" "We finished early and wanted to get home. Father told me what happened, but I didn't believe it, so I came to see for myself." Turning to Naruto, the young prodigy nailed him with a fierce, icy stare. "Is it true?" Naruto was fairly certain that if he answered in the affirmative he would not live to see tomorrow, and fumbled over his words. Hinata answered for him. "Yes, Hanabi, it's true. However, I would appreciate it if you wouldn't spread the fact around. Especially to the elders. We don't entirely know what is going on or how long it will last, and I would prefer not to have more noses poking around than we have to." Hanabi opened her mouth to reply, but Hinata cut her off. "I need to get Jiraiya in bed. Can you wait until then? I will try to answer you as best I can." Hanabi's eyes darted between her sister and Naruto before she nodded once sharply. Hinata gave them one last worried look before stepping out of the room. Hanabi's eyes returned to Naruto, looking him up and down critically. Doing the quick math in his head, Naruto figured she must be about 18 now, and wondered how her relationship with Hinata had changed, and what she thought of her sister's husband. Admittedly, Naruto did not have a lot of experience with the Hyuga. He knew they were generally considered rigid, old-fashioned, proud, and powerful, but the vast majority of his exposure to the clan had been through Neji and Hinata, and he knew that neither were really prime examples of the family. Neji had been once, but had undergone a drastic change after their first Chunin exams. Hinata had never been a typical Hyuga. Naruto had experienced few dealings with Hinata's father, Hayashi, but had come away with the impression that he was a stern man, and their incredibly brief meeting at the hospital the day before had left him with a burning curiosity to know what the man thought about his eldest daughter's marriage to the village demon pariah turned hero. With one issue after another slamming into him faster than he could keep up, Hinata's kid sister had not even entered his mind. Her icy stare left him after a moment, and she sat stiffly on the far end of the couch. Trying to ignore the tension in the air, Naruto sat on the opposite end of the other couch, sitting diagonally across the coffee table from Hanabi. He expected her to wait for Hinata to return, and so was once again caught off guard when she spoke. "Are you okay?" Her fierce expression was softened somewhat, surprising Naruto. She looked at him with genuine concern. He floundered for a moment, trying to decide if he was okay or not, and if he should answer her honestly or not. Heaving a sigh, he shrugged his shoulders. I don't really know. Every time I turn around, there's something new that I never even dreamed of being a part of my life. Hinata, Jiraiya, a genin team. I'd be lying if I said I'm handling it well. You're doing fine. Hanabi's eyes snapped to somewhere over his shoulder, and Naruto followed her gaze to see Hinata walking around the end of the couch. No one can blame you for finding it difficult to wake up 5 years older. Not for the first time, Naruto was both awed and indebted to Hinata's incredible patience and encouragement. She sat down next to him, leaving a comfortable space between, and Naruto caught himself wishing she had sat closer as he watched the few strands that had escaped her bun play around her cheekbones and neck. So what's going on? Hanabi asked bluntly. Hinata quickly laid out the situation, falling into a routine of sorts as she repeated the story. Hanabi's eyes never left her face, and she listened with a single-mindedness that surprised Naruto. When Hinata finished, Hanabi leaned back into the couch and folded her arms across her stomach, biting a thumbnail with a frown. Konohamaru's not going to be happy when he finds out. Naruto's stomach sank at the mention of his young friend. He cherished and appreciated every single friendship he was lucky enough to have, he really did. But the more time he spent without his memories, the more he was beginning to wish he didn't know so many people. Explaining the situation was beginning to wear on him, and he had already become fed up with grasping at absent memories. So there's nothing we can do? Hanabi's dismayed question brought him out of his pondering. What about the Nara? That entire clan is full of geniuses. Or the Yamanaka? Why not send one of them into your head? Naruto shrugged, balancing his elbows on his knees. I don't know about the Nara clan, but Kurama doesn't like people fooling around in my head. Last time Ino jumped in, he nearly snapped her in half. He's digging around on his own, and I doubt he would appreciate company. We've just got to do what we can on our end, Hinata asserted. Get you back into your routine as much as possible and hope something gets triggered. So, I take it you're not going to be moving anytime soon? Hanabi directed the question to her sister, but Naruto interrupted her. Moving? He glanced at the boxes stacked in the corner of the room and for the first time actually wondered at their purpose. Like, moving as in not living here anymore? He looked at Hinata, confused. She nodded shyly. I'm still the heiress to the clan. When my father retires, I'll inherit his position. There's never been a clan head that lived outside of the compound, and some of the elders are already against me because I'm married outside of the family. They don't want a family head that doesn't even live in the house. We were going to be moving this week, but Lady Tsunade wanted us to keep things the same for you. Don't worry, I still need to talk to my father and work out details, but for now, we're staying here. Naruto felt a little guilty about the small spark of relief he felt. It was just one more item on the growing list of ways he was upsetting Hinata's life. He was hyper-aware of Hanabi's penetrating gaze. The young Hyuga was studying him and Hinata very closely, and he had to consciously focus on not fidgeting. Before long, however, Hanabi stood decisively. Sorry I barged in. I just had to see it for myself. Hanabi paused for a moment, as if debating whether to continue or not. Let me know if there's anything I can do, okay? Hinata nodded and showed her sister to the door. The atmosphere as Naruto got into bed that night was tense, despite his wishes that he could do something, and it took him a while before he fell into restless sleep. The next few days passed with little fanfare or progress. When Hinata told Naruto he was always doing something different on his days off without much of a routine, he took advantage of that, and used it as an excuse to hide in the apartment. He delved into photo albums, forcing himself to look at the pictures he didn't remember. A constant migraine plagued him as he spent hours and hours stretching his mind, trying to remember anything. Hinata knew he was hiding out, but couldn't find it in herself to force him very far. She tried all she could to prod his memory with no success, and instead began finding ways to distract him from dwelling on the problem. Jiraiya was her favorite tactic. The little toddler was always eager for quality time with his father, and he relished the new game of teaching his father all of their old games. Although Jiraiya didn't understand his father's situation beyond that he was sick, he wasted no opportunity to force his father to his bidding. He insisted that Naruto was always the bad guy and always let Jiraiya beat him up to complete the mission. He promised Naruto that he had perfected hitting moving targets, and that Naruto absolutely must stand still so Jiraiya could throw his toy kunai and shuriken accurately at him. Despite these, decidedly abusive, one-sided battles as Jiraiya called them, Naruto found he enjoyed playing with the toddler immensely. He had always craved someone to play with, and having a little ball of energy that wanted nothing more than to play with him was possibly the best feeling in the world. As the days passed, he found that Jiraiya was exactly like him in more than just looks. His disposition and attitude were just like Naruto's. The toddler always had a smile on his face. His lips would stretch wide, pushing his chubby cheeks up and making him squint as he giggled, reminding Naruto distinctly of Hinata. He was also something of a daredevil. Jiraiya was always trying to leap off of something, be it a chair, the back of the couch, or out of Naruto's arms. He liked to make noise and be the center of attention, and Naruto quickly fell in love with the boy. The duo was in the middle of reenacting some imaginary battle with Jiraiya's many action figures and plushies when Hinata interrupted them. She had just returned from a meeting at the compound, and she knelt on Jiraiya's bedroom floor to speak to him. "Naruto?" she asked, softly calling his attention. Jiraiya continued on babbling mostly nonsense, as he smashed his stuffed toad into a small shodaime figure. Naruto was only half paying attention as one of his plastic figures engaged Jiraiya's toad plushie in mortal combat. "Yeah, Hinata?" he asked distractedly, lifting his figure high into the air to flee from the toad, complete with swooshing sound effects. "When I was at the meeting today, I had to inform the elders of our situation." Naruto tried not to react to her words. The clan was bound to find out eventually. "My father asked how you were doing. He would like to have lunch with us this afternoon." The figure in Naruto's hand slipped from his fingers, forgotten, and fell to the carpet where Jiraiya promptly slammed his toad on it, pounding it over and over again. Naruto's full attention was now completely on Hinata as he stared at her, wide-eyed with his jaw hanging slack. "The head of the Hyuga clan asked to have lunch with me?" he repeated, shocked. Hinata nodded, watching him worriedly, and Naruto hastily rearranged his expression. He had already discovered he did not like worrying Hinata. It twisted something in his gut, and made him anxious to fix every wrong in the world when she was upset. Okay? Where do we meet him?" A deep sense of foreboding welled up inside of him, but Naruto couldn't think of a way to refuse, arguably, the most powerful man in the village. 2 hours later, Naruto found himself sitting across a dining table from Hinata Hyuga. The food was excellent, and Hinata had led most of the conversation, speaking with her father about issues that had been discussed in the council meeting earlier that day. Naruto was only too happy to be forgotten. Eventually, however, Hayashi's purpose for asking to meet with him arose, and he excused his daughter. "Hinata, I wonder if you could give us some time alone. I would like to have a talk with Naruto, man to man." It was as good as an order, and there was little Hinata could do to deny it. She gave Naruto an encouraging smile, and then slipped out the door. Naruto could count the times he had been alone with the Hyuga clan head on one hand and still have all 5 fingers. Again, the burning desire to know exactly what Hinata Hyuga thought of his daughter's marriage to the demon container flared in his mind. Hayashi poured himself another saucer of sake and sipped it primly, still managing to look like the overwhelmingly capable shinobi that had sent Stone Shinobi running for the hills. Somewhere on the edges of his consciousness, Naruto remembered that this man had killed a man for trying to kidnap his heiress. Without warning, Hayashi's full attention was on Naruto, pinning him in place with those infamous pearly eyes. His stare wasn't outright hostile, but Naruto had found Hyuga eyes to be a bit unsettling ever since the day he had watched Hinata and Neji face off as genin. There was simply a dangerous calculating intelligence in those white eyes that gave away nothing. "Hinata has told me you have been making little progress." Hayashi's voice was deceptively quiet, but his words still felt like saban needles. Although it was irrational, Naruto felt as if Hayashi was blaming him for the loss of his memory. Resisting the urge to cringe, Naruto shrugged. "If she's told you I've made progress, she's been overwhelmingly generous. I haven't remembered anything." Hayashi nodded, apparently unsurprised. How have you been dealing with things? I'd imagine suddenly having a wife and son has shown its challenges. Naruto wasn't sure what Hayashi was getting at, but he could tell when he was in dangerous waters. Yeah, he admitted reluctantly. It's been hard. So many things are different from what I ever imagined my life being. Naruto saw Hayashi's eyes harden and wondered if he had said something wrong. Perhaps you no longer want them? He asked cryptically. Naruto's confusion must have shown on his face because Hayashi continued before he could reply. After all, you remember being an 18-year-old hero with every possibility before your feet. Now you find yourself tied to one woman that you have never considered before and a child. Where are you going with this? Naruto interrupted, refusing to feel bad for being rude. He had never been considered patient, and Hayashi echoing doubts he had already considered was not pleasant. I am simply looking after the interests of my daughter and grandson, Hayashi answered, his voice still calm but with a hint of anger. I have no wish to see either of them hurt simply because you are not ready for the commitment. Not I, nor anyone else I imagine, will blame you if you decide that this is not what you want. Many drastic changes happen to lead to where you are now, and without those it would make sense for you to come to a different conclusion of what you want. I simply wish for you to be sure of your choice before you make a mistake that will hurt my family. Hayashi's self-righteous demeanor didn't sit well with Naruto. Always conscious of the fact that he was missing 5 years of his life, Naruto had never really approved of the Hyuga clan's definition of family, and Hayashi trying to play on that now baited his temper faster than usual. Yeah, because all that's ever mattered is your precious family. Naruto snapped. The family that you curse and divide for power. Watch your tongue! Naruto was silenced as Hayashi's temper flashed and disappeared so quickly Naruto wasn't sure he had witnessed it. A tense silence filled the space between them before Hayashi spoke again, this time with a tone of chilling calm. Do not assume that I only care for the honor of my clan. While it is important to me, my daughter's happiness takes precedence. The only party that would be shamed by your possible infidelity would be you. However, I can assure you, such an event would shatter Hinata to such an extent I am not certain she would ever recover. Hayashi's words were spoken quickly and quietly, but Naruto didn't miss a single syllable. I am fully aware that as far as your memory serves you do not hold any feelings for my daughter stronger than friendship. While Hayashi's words were technically true, Naruto couldn't help but feel that in the space of only a few days he had grown to rely and depend on Hinata as more than simple friendship. And he was becoming increasingly attached to her in a way that could never be described as merely friendship. He sincerely enjoyed her company. He liked being around her and had found that when she was busy with errands he craved her presence. His feelings for her were new and unexpected and so different from the way he had ever felt for Sakura he had been unsure if they were the same feelings. But he was beginning to suspect they were far more powerful than anything he had ever felt for his old teammate. It had been a slow and painful process, but Naruto had been coming to the realization that he and Sakura would never be able to function in a romantic relationship. They were simply too at odds with one another. She had been the prettiest and most popular girl when they were young, at least as far as he was concerned, and it was only natural that the boy everyone hated would crave the attention of the girl everyone seemed to love. Naruto knew he had never tried to hide his feelings for Sakura and in fact preferred them to be public knowledge, but after the war, things had changed. Sakura had been so busy with the aftermath, doing all she could to heal a broken world and its people they hadn't had time to spend together. Even with his soul searching, he had avoided the subject of her feelings for Sasuke. Since Naruto had woken up beside Hinata without any memory of getting there, he hadn't had the time or the desire to examine how his feelings for Sakura had changed. My interests are solely in protecting my daughter's well-being. Make sure you are ready to commit to her before you give her any empty promises. Hayashi's words were as good as an accusation, as if the crimes of which he spoke had already been committed, and Naruto's pride flared to life right along with his temper. I don't make empty promises, he said flatly. If I tell Hinata I'm going to stick around, then you can bet your ass, the pride of your clan, and the whole of the Leaf Village that that's what I'm gonna do. Hayashi's answering stare did nothing to alleviate Naruto's temper. I have no intention of hurting Hinata, Naruto said seriously. She has done everything in her power to help me work through this, and I'll be damned if I let her down or pay her back by betraying her like that. I may have studied under the Sannin Jiraiya, but I have never shared his regard for women. Finally, the corner of Haishi's mouth lifted just a fraction, and he watched Naruto approvingly. When he spoke, his voice had softened considerably. You forget, Naruto, that I have known you for the better part of 5 years now, as a son. I know that you would never willingly hurt my daughter or her son. I simply hope to remind you that you are not necessarily a free man. The clan head spoke to Naruto with a familiarity that astounded him. True to his words, Hayashi spoke to Naruto in a way that reminded him of the brief experiences he had shared with his real father. You are free to make your own decision, of course, but I hope that you will remember Hinata has invested her entire life in yours. If you do decide that you are not ready to have the life laid before your feet, I ask that you consider her feelings when you choose where you will go. Naruto thought that was going to be all, but Hayashi poured another saucer of sake and continued. You need to prepare yourself. Not everyone in this clan was behind your marriage to my daughter. Things are changing, but there are still many that wish to continue the old ways. They will take any excuse they can and try to manipulate you. Just be ready. Sliding the door closed behind her, Hinata did her best to hold in a worried sigh. She had a fairly good guess what her father wanted to say to her husband, but the men in Hinata's life had a knack for acting in ways she didn't expect. She sat on the edge of the walkway, looking out to her mother's garden spread before her. When she was little, Hinata had helped her mother tend to the plants and flowers as her father worked tirelessly in his office. Her mother was gone now, had been for many years, and Hinata herself no longer had time to tend the flowers, but her father had maintained the peaceful beauty of the garden, and she took comfort in it. As she watched the bees hover lazily through the flowers, Hinata's mind wandered to the meeting earlier that morning. There was an old saying in the Leaf Village, that one should never try to hide something from a Hyuga's eyes, and it had proved true this morning. Hinata had nearly been ready to breathe a sigh of relief. Another meeting was nearly over and Naruto's condition was still unknown to the elders. There was still time to figure things out. Hinata, something has come to my attention recently that worries me. Hinata had to suppress the urge to cringe when Kimiko's spindly voice spoke out. Perhaps she had spoken too soon. What can I do to help, honored elder? Hinata asked, although she had a fairly good guess already. It has come to my attention, and I assure you I was shocked I was not informed by you, that your husband is not well. Kimiko practically spat when she mentioned Naruto. She had been the staunchest opponent against their marriage 4 years ago, and had taken her loss with bad grace. She had never liked Naruto, not because he had been considered by many to be a demon but because he was not Hyuga, and she had made his life hell any time he stepped foot inside the compound. I was informed that your husband does not remember that he is, in fact, your husband. Kimiko had a smug smile on her thin withered lips, and Hinata's gut twisted unpleasantly as she tried to see Kimiko's point without reacting. The rest of the council was watching like a murder of crows, simply waiting to see who would lose in this most recent episode of Elder vs. Heiress. They looked to Hinata now, and she felt the weight of their eyes like a physical entity, as they watched her with varied looks ranging from curiosity to bemusement. For now, however, they held their peace. We are not entirely sure what has happened, Hinata began, stalling a little. The Lady Hokage is trying to get to the bottom of the matter, but as of right now, we don't know very much. I did not want to bring the matter to the council's attention until we knew more. Kimiko had opened her mouth to retaliate, but Hayashi had beaten her to it, decisively ending the meeting and whisking Hinata away to his study. Kimiko had grumbled, not at all pleased with being cut off. Hinata sighed and closed her eyes, leaning her head against the post beside her. The last thing she needed was a prickly elder barking after her. Hinata, I've been looking for you. Speak of the devil and he shall appear, Hinata thought. Glancing over her shoulder, Hinata found Kimiko hobbling toward her with purpose. The woman was old, had always been old as far as Hinata could remember, but she was as fierce as a dragon, and Hinata knew not to underestimate her. What can I do for you? She asked tightly. Her short tone was bordering on impolite, but it wasn't enough for Kimiko to actually call her on it. Hinata knew she shouldn't be so spiteful, but a small amount of pride welled up inside her when the other woman's mouth tightened in disapproval. Will you still delay in returning to the estate? Hinata resisted the urge to roll her eyes at the woman's single-minded determination. Lady Tsunade has decided Naruto needs to be in a familiar place. Returning to the estate would only be detrimental to Hai. I am not asking about him. I am asking about you. Kimiko's voice was short and clipped, brushing aside Hinata's words. I am not going to leave my husband. But he's not your husband anymore, is he? Kimiko's chin lifted arrogantly, triumphantly. Perhaps the two of you are still legally bound, but he doesn't remember you, child. What must he think of you? A woman so desperate for him she will not even leave him in peace when he does not know her. I warned you from the beginning nothing good could come of this relationship. If you try to drag it out now, you will only bring shame to this family and heartache to yourself. You would do well to listen to your elders for once, Hinata. The old bat didn't give Hinata an opportunity to reply, but briskly continued down the hall, disappearing around the corner. Fighting the urge to scream, stamp her feet, and juke in something, Hinata huffed and pulled her hair over her shoulder. She's just trying to get in your head, Hinata, she reminded herself. Kimiko had played this same twisted game of cat and mouse with Hinata from the day she was reinstated as heiress. The woman's sole purpose in life was to see the old ways of the clan continued, and Hinata was a threat to that. Hinata had not even tried to hide the fact that she intended to abolish the caged bird seal at the first opportunity, among other changes, and Kimiko had done everything in her power to prevent it. When Naruto had formally given his support, he had become another target for the old woman. With his status as a war hero, the consort of the heiress, and an incredibly bright future as both a shinobi and possible Hokage, he held a lot of weight, even in clan matters. If Naruto was no longer a part of the equation, Hinata's work with the seal would be seriously delayed. Hinata had spoken with her father about the possibility of Naruto's situation being an attack by those who opposed her in the clan, but the idea was dismissed. The Hyuga did not have the means to erase someone's memory. That was the Yamanaka clan's area of expertise, and the Hyuga were too proud to involve others in their politics. No, Kimiko was simply taking advantage of the situation and trying to play on any possible uncertainties or misgivings Hinata may have. She's simply too good at what she does, Hinata thought bitterly. But she would not be rattled. Hinata had been dealing with overconfident snobby clansmen that underestimated her all her life. She would weather this storm as she had all the others. True to her nature, Hinata left the private words spoken between her husband and her father between them. She worried that her father had said something to upset Naruto, judging by his unusually quiet mood as they left the compound, but couldn't think of anything to say to cheer him up, especially without knowing what had upset him in the first place. Once again, she felt uncomfortably shy as she had when they were younger, and she had barely been able to even look at Naruto without fainting. She was struggling with decisions of her own and was puzzling over how to bring some of them to her husband's attention when Naruto gave a sharp intake of breath and ground to a halt beside her. She glanced up at him and then looked down the street in the direction he was watching to find a large group of people loitering against the rail of the bridge. She was unsure why such a group would upset Naruto, making him so tense so suddenly, when she heard Kiba's distinct yelling accompanied by a familiar bark. Looking closer at the group, Hinata realized that nearly all of their friends was gathered on the bridge that led back to their apartment. They're still your friends, Naruto. You can't hide from them forever. She laid a gentle hand on his arm, trying to comfort him and feeling slightly ashamed that she found comfort in the contact. This isn't about you, she reprimanded herself. They aren't going to be upset that you've lost your memory. At least, not upset with you. Naruto couldn't hold back a dark grin. Shino will. He took another moment to prepare himself before leading her toward their friends. Let's get this over with. It was Sasuke, standing on the edge of the gathering, who spotted them first. Hinata knew that no matter how well he had braced himself, seeing the Uchiha face to face would be unsettling for Naruto, and she deftly slipped her hand into his, lacing their fingers together. Her earlier shyness seemed to have deserted her now that Naruto needed her support. She gave an encouraging squeeze and Naruto's fingers constricted around hers for a moment, accepting the support she offered. Sasuke's dark eyes scanned Naruto carefully before flickering to her. In the 3 years since Sasuke had stepped back into their lives, he and Hinata had found a strange sort of companionship. Both were entirely focused on Naruto's happiness and well-being, and with a common goal to work toward had struck up a tentative but supportive friendship. It had been Sasuke watching over Hinata when she had gone into labor with Jiraiya. Because of his desire to see Naruto happy, and knowing that Hinata's happiness and safety were a direct influence on that, Sasuke had, like the rest of the Konoha 11, become rather protective of the heiress. That protectiveness exhibited itself now as he silently asked her if everything was okay in a single look. Hinata gave him a tight smile and a small short nod before Kiba was in front of them. Like Naruto, Kiba had never had much regard for personal space, and he looked Naruto in the eye, practically nose to nose, and sniffed deeply. He took a step back but still eyed Naruto suspiciously. "Well, you're really Naruto. I guess the idea of a doppelganger is out," he announced loudly, folding his arms tightly over his chest. He was still eyeing Naruto critically, Akamaru at his heels. "Doppelganger? Kiba, what are you talking about?" Hinata asked, stepping in for Naruto. He was absolutely rigid beside her, and she doubted he would have been able to speak. As much as she loved Kiba, she knew he could be a little overbearing at times. "Well, it's the only explanation I can think of," Kiba answered matter-of-factly. "Ino said his memory is gone, but there isn't any reason for it to be. The only reason I can think up is that he's a fake and is just using amnesia as a cover for not knowing shit." "Ino?" Hinata accused, finding the blonde peeking over Shino's shoulder and looking at her pleadingly. "I'm sorry, Hinata," Sakura broke in, pushing her way to the front of the group. "Tsunade told Ino hoping that she could figure something out with her psychology background, and she can't keep a secret to save her life." "Hey! I keep no secrets from my friends. We all had a right to know what's going on with our Naruto," Ino defended hotly. "Oh yeah, pig? Well, what about Naruto and Hinata's right to some privacy, huh? What about that?" Sakura bit back and the two quickly devolved into one of their heated yelling matches. "It doesn't matter." This was a lazy voice from the back and everyone turned to look at Shikamaru. He shrugged when he noticed everyone's attention on him and flicked his cigarette lazily. "Ino spilled and now we know. The point is we have a problem and we can all work to fix it now. How Naruto lost his memory, and why he lost it aren't necessarily the problem we need to solve. What we need to know, right now, is how we're going to deal with it. I'm assuming you want your memory back?" The last question was directed to Naruto, and it seemed to jar him from his frozen stupor. He reminded Hinata a bit of a cornered animal, but he straightened his shoulders and met Shikamaru's piercing gaze. It would be nice to know what the hell is going on. His fingers were still squeezing her hand tightly, and Hinata placed her other hand on his bicep, wishing she could do more. Shikamaru nodded and took a drag from his cigarette. "There you have it. So since none of us have managed to think of any solution in the past hour, I'm going home. Have a nice night." Without further discussion, the young genius turned and began walking down the street, raising a hand over his shoulder in farewell. Everyone else looked at each other for a moment, slightly stunned by Shikamaru's abrupt departure, not sure what to do before Choji shrugged and slapped Naruto on the shoulder. "Shika's right. Let me know if there's anything I can do, okay?" With his piece said, Choji said his farewell before following Shikamaru's example and leaving. The others quickly followed suit, each promising to do whatever they could, until it was just the members of Teams 7 and 8 remaining. The boys of Team 8 seemed to be having a silent conversation with Hinata, the three staring at each other intently before Kiba nodded, hugged her tightly and left with Shino, both speaking quietly to each other. Naruto was watching his own team. He had a hard time looking away from Sasuke, and the Uchiha stared back stoically. Hinata was still holding Naruto's hand and she could feel him shaking. "Please don't try to fight him, Naruto," she prayed silently. "Where's Kakashi-sensei? And Yamato and Sai? I haven't seen any of them lately," Naruto asked, trying too hard to sound casual. He had directed his question to Sakura, but Sasuke was the one to answer, and Naruto's eyes snapped to him harshly. His entire body was absolutely rigid and Hinata squeezed his hand again, but received no response this time. All three of them are on a mission together. They should be getting back in the next few days. He was still watching Naruto intently, as if trying to convince himself of something. Abruptly, he turned to Hinata and said, "You know where to find me if you need me." Without another word, his body flickered away. Naruto let out a breath he had been holding and leaned against Hinata's shoulder slightly. "I see he hasn't changed much." "I think he's just trying to give you some space," Sakura defended. "He knows what your last memories of him were. Try to be patient with him." "Me? Be patient with him? I'm the one that's messed up here, Sakura." Naruto's temper exploded. He dropped Hinata's hand and got in Sakura's face. "He's had 5 years to stop being a bastard. And he just lost his best friend," Sakura shouted, not even flinching in the face of Naruto's anger. "I know this is hard on you, Naruto, more than anyone, but you are not the only person that's been affected by it." The two old teammates glared at each other, chewing on their words before Sakura sighed. "This isn't easy for any of us, Naruto. Sasuke is back in the village, but things haven't been easy for him. He's relied on you for a lot, and now that support is gone." "I'm not saying it's your fault," Sakura rushed on, holding up a hand to stop Naruto when he opened his mouth to defend himself. "But he's having a hard time with this too." The two stared at each other, communicating in a way only they could after everything they had been through together, before Sakura sighed again and turned to Hinata. "Again, Hinata, I'm sorry about Ino. I tried to stop her but I wasn't fast enough." Hinata waved off Sakura's apology. "It's fine. They were going to have to find out eventually. I suppose I should be grateful, really. This way I don't have to explain everything myself." Despite feeling like she had once again run an emotional gauntlet, Hinata was determined to remain positive. Sakura nodded hesitantly. "Well, keep me posted, I guess. I'll see you guys later, okay?" And with that, Naruto and Hinata were once again left to make their way home. Without saying a word, the couple turned and continued down the street and arrived at their small apartment. It wasn't until Kurenai, who had been watching Jiraiya, had left that Naruto broke the silence. "Sorry I freaked out back there." He wouldn't look at her, choosing to examine his toes instead, as he bashfully rubbed the back of his neck. Hinata just watched him for a moment, wishing she could hold him in her arms. Despite knowing Kimiko's words were only said out of spite, the hint of truth in them had stung. Hinata was always painfully aware of the fact that Naruto did not remember their relationship. "Don't worry about it. I've told you before, you're doing fine. You've had a lot to deal with." Those beautiful blue eyes she loved peeked up at her through blonde bangs, and she couldn't help but fidget shyly. "How do you do that?" he asked softly. She didn't know what he meant and quirked an eyebrow in question. "How do you put up with all of this, with me, so easily? It's like it doesn't even faze you." Hinata shrugged and answered before she really thought her words through. "Because I love you." Naruto's reaction was instantaneous. He straightened, sucking in a gasp and staring at her with wide eyes, and Hinata abruptly remembered that he wasn't used to hearing that. She wasn't ashamed, and she didn't regret telling him. She had repeated those 3 words to him every day for nearly 5 years. Saying them was as natural as breathing to her. Her love for him was a part of her, had been for a very long time, and whether he accepted that or not did not change the fact that it was the driving force behind her ability to face each new challenge they encountered. But she also knew what hearing her say those words meant to him. More seriously, she looked him right in the eye. "I do." He was holding his breath, staring at her with an emotion she could only describe as awe, and she decided to try to break the tension. "I'm sorry I can't give you any advice on how to deal with everything. You don't have the same motivation I do." She said it as a joke, adding a little half laugh, but Naruto blinked at her, looking confused. "Huh?" She shrugged again, now feeling bashful. "None of this is as difficult for me as it is for you. For one, I'm not the one that lost my memories. And the fact that I love you makes everything easier. You don't have either of those luxuries." Naruto's confused expression morphed into one of curiosity. "Are you saying if our positions were reversed it would be easier for you because you love me?" Hinata nodded. "More or less. If I woke up and was told you were my husband, I don't think I'd question it. I've loved you for so long I'd be afraid of going to sleep in case it all turned out to be a dream. Unfortunately for you, you fell in love with me after you came home after the war. Anyways, it's been a long morning. I think I'm going to take a nap, okay?" Hinata smiled at him sweetly, and when he nodded, a little absent-mindedly, she left him to his thoughts. Chapter 6. Naruto sat on the couch in the living room, musing over the events of the day before. His meeting with Hayashi had given him plenty to think about, all on its own. Then there was the entire subject of Sasuke, which was a different beast altogether he still wasn't ready to face. There wasn't really a question as to why Hinata was the chief focus of his musings. It was easily the most pleasant subject. She loves me. Logically, the statement shouldn't have surprised him. They were married. They had a child together. Although he knew it wasn't always the case, love generally preceded those events. When Naruto had learned his parents' love story, he had known from that moment that he wanted one like it. He wanted to be loved by his wife the way his father had been loved by his mother. And he wanted to return that love. But Hinata? Where had that even come from? He knew she had admired him for many years, but there was a distinct difference between admiration and love. He was on the opposite end of it himself. He admired Hinata, there was no doubt. She was an incredible person, both as a shinobi and as a woman. She was powerful, fast, smart, resourceful, adaptable, and everything a shinobi should be. As a woman she was beautiful, positively stunning, kind, gentle, patient, and the most spectacular mother he had ever seen, including his own. Naruto had been watching her closely, studying her in the days since his memory loss, and he had come to the conclusion that he had been right when he told her she would make an amazing wife one day. Her cooking was even better than when they were kids. She always seemed to know what to do or say, and despite the mess they were in, she had kept their home running smoothly. The kitchen was always clean, Jiraiya's room was always neat, laundry was done. She had even unpacked the boxes she had prepared for the move. Naruto had tried to assist her, although he probably hindered more than helped. Even so, she had patiently guided him as keepsakes were returned to shelves and the boxes were quickly unpacked. But even as Naruto catalogued Hinata's many wonderful qualities, he couldn't help but wonder what on earth had happened to make him see her in such a different light. True, he hadn't been able to get her out of his head since Niji's death, but that didn't really mean anything, did it? He knew he was missing a vital piece of information from Pain's invasion, but when Kurama had offered to show him, he hadn't had the courage. He had not been ready to face the realities of the war so soon after its end, and whatever had been horrible enough to make him lose control on such a level was not something he was in a hurry to relive. When Kurama had made the proposition, Naruto had doubted if he would ever be ready to see it. Now, he wondered if those missing moments in the middle of a battle could have possibly had such an impact on him. As he sat on the couch in the living room, he toyed with the idea of asking Kurama to show him what had happened, along with all of his other missing memories, but discarded the idea. He didn't even know if he had chosen to see them in the 5 years since. There was a possibility that those moments, lost but still accounted for, didn't have any influence on how his life had reached this point. Besides, the fox had been completely silent, supposedly searching for Naruto's lost memories, and he would probably not appreciate being interrupted. It was best to just leave him to it. As his eyes aimlessly roamed the room, Naruto spotted a picture sitting on the entertainment center. It was another of him and Hinata, like the dozens of others that littered the house. Someone had taken the photo when neither of the subjects had been paying attention. They appeared to be at some festival and Naruto's head was leaning against Hinata's, the two smiling at each other with expressions Naruto had only ever dreamed of sharing with someone. It was another reminder, among many, that Naruto had grown to love Hinata deeply, and not being able to recall that feeling nearly crushed him. His thumb pressed into the wedding band around his finger, compounding his guilt. Fiddling with the ring had become a habit as he was not used to wearing rings and such on his hands. It was a constant reminder of his missing life, but he hadn't been able to just drop it. Abruptly, Naruto stood from the couch and made a beeline for the door before pausing. Hinata would worry if she woke from her nap and he wasn't there. The table in the hallway had a few odds and ends, among them a pen and a scrap of paper, and Naruto quickly jotted down a note saying he would be back later before running out the door. Even at the risk of running into people he may know, anything was better right now than the constant reminders all over the apartment that he was failing as a husband. He ran over the rooftops without any real direction, but wasn't surprised when he ended up at Team 7's training ground. Since his first day as a genin, that training ground had been a sanctuary, somewhere he could go to find peace or blow off steam. He was surprised to hear the electric chirping of a Chidori. Before Naruto could make the decision to stay and face Sasuke or run, he was spotted. "Should you really be wandering around on your own?" Sasuke was watching him closely, and the superiority in his voice rankled the blonde. "Should you?" Naruto shot back, his foul mood lashing out before he could stop it. He tried to ignore the small twinge of guilt when Sasuke flinched just the tiniest bit. "Sorry," he muttered. "The last time I saw you I got some lame excuse about you needing to figure things out." Sasuke looked away, a brooding glare on his face, but did not answer, and a tense silence stretched between the two men. "So what changed?" Black eyes met blue, asking what he meant. "What happened to make you come back?" Sasuke quirked an eyebrow at him, a smirk settling on his lips. "I don't think I'm supposed to tell you that. Sakura gave me strict instructions not to fill you in on memories." Naruto bit back a growl and turned his eyes away, staring across the field. "What are you doing out here? You've been holed up since you and Hinata got back from Waterfall. Why come out now?" Naruto wasn't entirely sure how to put his feelings into words. "I just needed to get out of the house. All I can think about is how much I'm screwing up Hinata's life." Sasuke gave him a look Naruto couldn't quite decipher, and then moved to sit against one of the wooden training posts. "I don't even know what I'm doing there." Naruto wasn't sure if Sasuke was even listening to him anymore, but now that he had started talking it was hard to stop. "She's just so good and so sweet, and I know we were happy, but I have no idea how we got there. What happened?" He looked at Sasuke, hoping for an answer, but was disappointed with what he got. "I don't know," Sasuke shrugged. When Naruto shot him a disbelieving look, he glared back. "I really don't know, though. The two of you were already married when I came back. You weren't the only one surprised by that relationship." Naruto huffed and slid down the wooden post next to Sasuke's. "Can you tell me anything about us? Hinata and me, I mean." Sasuke shrugged again, and Naruto briefly wondered where he had picked up such a casual gesture. It was strange coming from the stiff Uchiha. "The two of you tend to keep your private life private. You don't try to hide anything, but you don't walk around flaunting your relationship either. I can tell you that you've never been closer to anyone than you are to Hinata." Again, Naruto looked at him skeptically, an eyebrow raised. Sasuke sighed, a touch dramatically Naruto felt, and rolled his dark eyes. "We've never really put it into words, but you and I have an understanding. We just get each other." Naruto nodded. That was true. From that very first disaster of a mission to Wave, Naruto and Sasuke had been connected, for better or worse. "You and Hinata are on a whole different level. To be quite honest, if your relationship was the norm, I don't think I would ever be ready to get married. To have someone know me as intimately as your wife knows you, I don't think I'm ready for that. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that." Sasuke's dark eyes had taken on a far-off look, like he wasn't entirely in the present anymore. "We were that close?" Naruto asked timidly, and Sasuke abruptly refocused on him. "You once explained something to me. You told me that if it ever came to a choice between me and Hinata, you would choose her." Sasuke's eyes were hard, boring holes into Naruto, but the blonde couldn't bring himself to look away. "What do you mean, choose between you?" "I mean if both Hinata and I were in a life-or-death situation, and you could only save one of us." Naruto opened his mouth to argue, but Sasuke wouldn't let him. "If you couldn't use your shadow clones, I don't know why, Naruto, this is just how you explained it to me. If you could only save one of us, her or me, you told me you would choose her." Naruto wasn't sure how he felt about that. To know that he cared for someone enough to choose them over Sasuke, it was nearly unfathomable. Naruto had never had a bond like what he shared with Sasuke. Until Hinata, apparently. Was that level of intimacy even possible? I don't know all the details surrounding you and her, but I do know you love her. More than anything. For once, Sasuke was serious. Not his normal, broody, rude, sarcastic serious, but genuinely honest as he spoke. I don't know how it happened before, and I know you're probably frustrated and don't want to deal with any of it, but I figure if it happened once, it could happen again, right? Again, the uncomfortable feeling that he was somehow letting Hinata down by not remembering their life together welled up inside of him, and Naruto used the first thing he could think of to change the topic. So why did you come back? Once the words were out of his mouth, Naruto wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Sasuke's dark eyes stared into his again, weighing his answer. You finally tracked me down and sent half a dozen Rasengan into my face. And it was time. I finally managed to get my head on straight. I ran from the village after the war because I hadn't come to terms with the reasons behind Itachi's exile. It took a while, but I eventually came to the conclusion that it didn't make a whole lot of sense to run from something my brother had given up everything to protect. Naruto listened to his friend carefully. He had dreamed of bringing Sasuke back to the village for years, but had never really figured out a plan to do it. It seemed in the end, it was simply Sasuke's decision more than anything Naruto had done or said. And I knew you would never stop following me if I didn't come back. You're less annoying this way. Sasuke's comment was said in his normal monotonous spiteful way, but Naruto could detect the small bit of affection underneath. Okay, so maybe he had a little bit of influence. Like Sasuke had said, he and Naruto just understood one another. A few days later Naruto woke up before Hinata, arms once again wrapped around her waist. It wasn't unusual. He was usually up before her, and whether he meant for it to happen or not, she was always in his arms. Watching the sunlight streaming in from the window play across her features, he decided to take a moment and really look at her in the quiet of the morning. Watching people had always been a habit of his, from the time he was very small and he first realized he wasn't like most people. Naruto had watched as parents came to the park to take their children home for dinner, or pick them up from the academy, and wondered why no one ever came to get him. He had watched as villagers, civilian and shinobi alike, stared at him with those hateful eyes and would think for hours on end what he could have possibly done that was so bad. He'd had an incredible fascination with Gaara and Sasuke, two people so like him, and yet so different, their lots in life separated only by the luck of the draw. Since waking up without a single memory of the past 5 years, Hinata had become his new focus. He had watched her like a hawk, grasping at any hint into their life together, but she was a master at following orders and hadn't given much away. His eyes roamed her face, taking in her soft features that he knew perfectly by now but still found new details to appreciate. Over the past week or so life had settled down, despite his memories still hiding somewhere. Hinata had helped him pilot his way through everything from training and relearning his limits to explaining the whole mess to everyone with a patience Naruto could only ever dream of having. She seemed to know him perfectly, prodding his mind to remember things and then backing off and giving him space just when he felt like he was about to snap. She weathered his temper when he reached the end of his wits because of some new detail he had discovered that he should have known. She kept their friends off his back, warding off questions he didn't have answers to with grace and tact. She did everything for him, and with Hayashi's words from their lunch, and Sasuke's from their conversation by the memorial stone echoing in his mind, Naruto decided it was about time he started helping her out. He carefully unraveled himself from her and crept out of the bedroom to the kitchen and began gathering ingredients for eggs and something special. Just as he was pouring scrambled eggs into the pan, little Jiraiya stumbled into the kitchen and hugged his leg, rubbing one eye. "Morning, Froggy," Naruto greeted cheerfully, borrowing the nickname he had learned he'd given the toddler. He still felt horribly out of his depth trying to be a father, but Jiraiya's absolute trust and happy nature helped ease his worries, and Naruto absolutely loved trying to take care of him, even if he had to refer to Hinata more often than not. "Hi, Papa," the toddler mumbled into the side of Naruto's thigh. "What's for breakfast?" "Eggs," Naruto announced, flourishing his spatula proudly. "Why don't you go get Mama and tell her it's almost ready?" Jiraiya nodded and then weaved his way sleepily out of the kitchen and back toward the bedroom. When Naruto had the table completely set with plates piled with eggs and toast and glasses filled with juice and milk with no sign of mother or son, he snuck back to the bedroom himself. Peeking around the door, he found Jiraiya asleep in the bed nestled in Hinata's arms, both completely dead to the world. Shaking his head a bit and grinning widely, Naruto crossed the room and poked Jiraiya in his plump little belly. A small hand batted half-heartedly at his finger, and a sleepy eye squinted open at him. "Hey," Naruto whispered, a mock frown on his face. "I thought I told you to wake Mama up, not go back to sleep." "But I wanted to cuddle my baby." Hinata mumbled and peeked at him from under her bangs, a sleepy smile on her face. Naruto couldn't help but smile at her. "Well, I made you breakfast, so come and eat." Naruto tried not to let his ego get too big at the surprised but pleased expression on Hinata's face. He triumphantly led the way out to the kitchen and pulled Hinata's chair out for her dramatically before helping Jiraiya up to the table. When the eggs had been consumed, Naruto revealed his next surprise. Having relearned, during the week, that one of Hinata's favorite foods was cinnamon buns, he had been planning this for a few days. Pulling a tray from the oven, he placed a dozen cinnamon buns on the table in front of Hinata with a flourish of his hand, giving himself a few mental brownie points for putting that shocked but happy smile on her face twice in one morning. Jiraiya bounced excitedly and clapped his hands, calling for a roll. As Naruto put half a roll on a plate for the toddler, Hinata abruptly stood from her chair. "You two go on without me, I'll be right back," she said tightly, placing a hand on his shoulder gently with a small smile before quickly leaving the kitchen. Naruto stared after her for a moment before turning back to Jiraiya, his brows knitting together. Jiraiya was happily tearing his roll apart and shoving big sticky pieces into his mouth, oblivious to his mother's strange behavior. Naruto sniffed the pan of rolls cautiously and found nothing wrong. "Don't make a mess," he told Jiraiya, not really expecting the order to be obeyed, before turning and following Hinata back to the bedroom. He found the room empty and almost wrote it off and returned to the kitchen when he heard retching coming from behind the closed bathroom door. Panic welled up in his chest before he could really think, and he charged through the door. Hinata crouched at the toilet, her hair pulled back into one hand as she heaved up her breakfast. Naruto dashed to her side, taking hold of her hair and rubbing her shoulder helplessly, thinking frantically for a way to help. After what seemed like forever, but sooner than he expected, Hinata gently pushed him back, stood, flushed the toilet, and moved to the sink to wash out her mouth. She seemed so calm about the whole episode, but Naruto was trying valiantly to beat down the panic and uncertainty that was still welling up in his chest. "Hinata, are you okay?" he asked, stepping behind her uncertainly. She nodded and waved a hand at him as she swished water in her mouth. "Are you sure? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you sick, I thought I was a better cook than that." Hinata shook her head and waved again before spitting out the water in her mouth. "I'm fine, Naruto," she insisted a little tiredly as she leaned against the sink. "Nausea is a perfectly normal symptom of pregnancy." Every thought in Naruto's head ground to a halt. He was fairly certain something had short-circuited in his brain. Pregnancy? He echoed breathlessly. Hinata's back was still to him, and she refused to meet his eyes in the mirror. Her hands were on either side of the sink and seemed to be the only thing holding her up. "You're pregnant?" he asked uncertainly, barely daring to believe it. Still not meeting his eyes, Hinata's head bobbed up and down a few times, and she let out a quiet sigh. "Did I know? Before, I mean." His voice seemed pitifully small, even in the little bathroom. Her head shook side to side. "I didn't know until we got back. I didn't suspect until after we had left for our trip, so I hadn't bothered to find out. It was a possibility. We'd been trying for a few months. I asked Sakura to check when Lady Tsunade was looking at you," she answered, her voice almost a whisper. "When were you going to tell me?" Silence reigned for a moment before Hinata turned to face him, leaning back against the sink and folding her arms under her breasts. She met his eyes, he could see the worry in her big expressive white eyes, and in a soft voice she said, when it became an issue, "I didn't want to pile anything else on top of everything that's already happened." The two stared at each other for a moment as Naruto tried to find something to say, and Hinata eventually dropped her eyes to the floor. A few weeks ago he was 18 years old with a tentative path laid before his feet. Now he was a husband to a woman he didn't know, a father to a child he didn't remember, and apparently had another on the way that he had no idea how to deal with. Hinata's toe was rubbing against the tile, and she heaved another deep breath before looking up at him squarely. Look, Naruto, I know this is a lot to take in. And I understand that you didn't really ask for any of it. As far as you remember, I'm just another friend. I don't want you to feel like you have to stay. I don't want to be an obligation to you. I want to be a choice. And I want Jiraiya, and this new baby to be a choice. Naruto looked at her hard, his eyes searching her face as he listened to her. I want you to think and decide what the best thing for you, right now, is. If that's staying here and trying to remember everything, then okay. She paused, her eyes falling to the tile again, and he could tell she was struggling to get the words out. If that means you want to start over, or back where you can remember, before any of this, she waved a vague hand around the bathroom, indicating the apartment in general, their life together, then okay. I want you to be happy, and if you're not going to be happy here, then I don't want you to try to force it. Don't worry about me, or Jiraiya, or the baby. I'll be fine, I've got my father, and Hanabi, and the clan. Don't feel like you have to stay here because of me, if it's not what you want, okay? Her pearly eyes returned to his face, searching for a moment before she smiled that breathtakingly sweet, sad smile. You don't have to decide anything right now, but think about it, she told him softly before turning and walking out of the bathroom. He couldn't move. Naruto was rooted to the spot, eyes staring glassily at where she had been. His mind worked sluggishly, trying to sew details together. Trying to make sense of what his life was now. Trying to make sense of what had just happened. Systematically, he began to list things out. He was 23 years old. He was married to Hinata Hyuga. They had a son together, Jiraiya. Hinata was pregnant with their second child. Despite what she had said about him not asking for this, Naruto knew that at some point he had asked for it. And Hinata had given it. For as long as he could remember, Naruto had wanted a family. True, when he was younger the image he had conjured up was more of him as the child with parents, rather than actually being the parent, but still. He wanted a family. And although he didn't remember this one, he could tell he had been happy here. He saw it in the pictures all over the house, and the friends, old and new, that he had chanced across in the last week. He saw it in Jiraiya's little face, when that perfect little boy smiled up at him with so much trust and love and happiness as Naruto tucked him in at night. He saw it in the absolute simplicity the last week had been. Naruto may not remember how he and Hinata had happened, but there was no denying that they had happened. As strange as it seemed, the simplest, easiest times he'd had since waking up next to her, so unexpectedly, had been when he was alone with her and Jiraiya. Consciously, he did not remember anything, but just like when he had sparred with Kyoto, his body knew what to do. He found himself moving around Hinata in the kitchen like he had been doing it for years. Without having to look, he could feel where she was and where she was going to move next, and he knew how to move around her so that neither of them were inconvenienced. He knew when to turn to catch Jiraiya when he was trying to do some ridiculous stunt off of a chair, or the back of the couch, or off of a wall. That wasn't to say things hadn't been difficult. Simple was a relative term, and although being with Hinata and Jiraiya had been the easiest to deal with, the situation came with its own set of challenges. The state of his relationship with Hinata had proved to be a large one, which he hadn't really been sure he could overcome. Trying to navigate the confusing waters of waking up to a marriage with a girl Naruto had never thought of beyond a comrade and friend had certainly thrown him for a loop, but at the same time everything had felt so natural. He knew he was attracted to her, that much was obvious. His body was practically hardwired to react to hers. He simply felt when she was close. When they touched, brushed hands accidentally or looked at one another, his body practically hummed. Naruto had agonized over the feelings that welled up inside of him when he thought about her. She was his friend and he should not be thinking things about her that would make the pervy sage blush and giggle to himself as he scribbled down notes. But he was, and despite the fact that he wanted to respect her as his friend, a small voice in his head nagged at him that she was also his wife now, and the fact that he constantly wanted to jump her couldn't be that bad, right? That first morning home, when he had woken up wrapped around Hinata, he hadn't been embarrassed. Yes, a part of him had been shocked and surprised that he had grabbed a hold of her in his sleep, but the overwhelming majority of his being had found it to be the most natural thing in the world. And over the week, as they shared a bed, Naruto had found he had difficulty falling asleep unless he was holding her. Yes, it was possible, it just took longer, and when he woke he found himself wrapped around her anyway. Every night, without fail, Naruto would grab Hinata, if not when he was awake, then while he slept. Hinata had never commented on it beyond that first morning, and he had found that he enjoyed when she held him back. He liked the feeling of her arm around his waist. He liked the way her head tucked under his chin, and her nose pressed into his neck. Even ignoring his physical attraction to her, over the last week Naruto had spent more time with Hinata than anyone else in his life, with the possible exception of Team 7. She was always there. Not in an obnoxious hovering sort of way, but in a quiet, comforting sense, reassuring him that when something didn't add up, he could look over his shoulder at her and receive an explanation. Naruto had developed a habit of scrutinizing everything Hinata said, looking for clues into their relationship. He had discovered that he was perfectly comfortable asking her anything, even the truly dumb questions, and the usual fear of rejection or being called an idiot wasn't there. Hinata would never degrade him like that, and Naruto sincerely enjoyed talking with her. While he had been hiding in the apartment, trying to avoid everyone and everything, Naruto had passed the time by talking and discovered that Hinata was an incredible listener. He could talk about anything with her, and found that he had spilled most of his soul to her before realizing he was talking about things he had never even spoken to Kurama about. In hindsight, he figured she had probably already heard everything he had to say, after 4 years of marriage, but for him this was all new, and to be able to just talk was an incredible release. The fact that she actively listened to him with unwavering patience was nothing short of incredible. Even stranger, Naruto liked to listen to her talk. She spoke clearly and succinctly, choosing her words well before using them. She had decided opinions and managed to express them without degrading others' opinions. He had spent hours and hours over the last week simply asking her questions about what she thought of things and soaking up her answers. The sound of her soft voice could calm him in an instant. From a logical standpoint, the last week had been the strangest of his life. He was living in a house with Hinata Hyuga, grasping at threads of a life he could not remember no matter how hard he had tried, and it was weird. But that was only the logical side of him, and Naruto had never been controlled by his logical side. He was a man driven by his emotions. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and he had no problem letting people know how he felt. He knew what his emotions were telling him. Although he didn't remember this life, he had been happy here, despite Hinata's worries. And even without his memories, Naruto was happy now. He liked having other people in his home. He liked hearing Jiraiya laugh and bang into things and make more noise than anyone ever should. He liked Hinata's quiet presence throughout the house and the warm and comforting feelings she left in her wake. It was natural. He liked Hinata. He wasn't naive enough to believe he loved her. As far as he could figure, Naruto had loved her deeply, but he didn't remember anything that had led to that love, and knew that all he could say about his feelings now was that he liked her. A lot. He could certainly imagine his feelings growing into love one day, but he wasn't there yet. But one thing he was certain of in this confusing labyrinth his life had become was that he didn't want to lose that chance. Abruptly, Naruto realized he had been standing in the bathroom, alone, for quite a while now. He could hear Hinata in the kitchen and Jiraiya laughing at cartoons on the television. He carefully crept out of the bathroom, then the bedroom and to the end of the hall. Just as he reached the end, Jiraiya abruptly stood, scrambled straight over the back of the couch and into the kitchen. He poked Hinata in the leg, asked for a glass of water and spun in a circle to entertain himself while his mother served him. He took the glass from his mother in both hands and began guzzling water noisily. Hinata laughed quietly at her son's antics, and a hand drifted to her stomach. Naruto's eyes zeroed in on her, and perhaps he was just imagining it, but he thought he could see a slight curve right between Hinata's hips just below her otherwise flat stomach. Naruto watched, transfixed as the scene played out between mother and child. It was only one of hundreds he had witnessed over the last week, but for some reason this one hit him harder than any of the others. Perhaps it was because of the choice Hinata had laid before him, the ultimatum really, but right in that moment Naruto felt a possessiveness unlike anything he had ever felt before. This was his family. Hinata had told him he hadn't chosen this, but he had. This life existed because he had chosen to marry her. He had helped create that magnificent little boy standing in front of her. He was the reason she was pregnant now, and he would be damned if he left her to face that alone, amnesia or not. Before he could stop himself, that possessiveness was compelling him into action, and Naruto had crossed the distance from the end of the hall to Hinata before he realized he was moving. She looked up at him, surprised, as an arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her to him, and a hand slid around the back of her neck. In an instant, Naruto acted on the feelings that had been compelling him for days, and his lips were on hers, and he hoped this moment would never end. Hinata's reaction was instantaneous. Her hands flew to his face, holding him to her, her fingers weaving into his hair as she inhaled sharply, and her tongue expertly slid into his mouth. Her thumb rubbed against a spot just above his Adam's apple and drove all thoughts from his mind. Naruto was not an experienced kisser. To this day, he denied that whole episode with Sasuke. Hinata, on the other hand, obviously knew what she was doing. Her tongue on his was the best feeling he had ever experienced, beyond anything he could have imagined, and once again, his body took over, remembering things his brain couldn't. Just as Naruto began to take a more active part in the kiss, a hard tug on the hem of his shirt distracted him, and Hinata pulled away, looking down. Jiraiya glared up at them, his tiny fingers fisted in the hem of Naruto's shirt, and held his empty water glass up to them. "I was here first, Papa. Stop kissin' Mama." Naruto felt his eyebrows climb toward his hairline in both surprise and amusement at Jiraiya's annoyance. "Sorry, Froggy," Hinata said quietly as she took Jiraiya's glass and set it on the counter. She was trying to hide behind her bangs, but Naruto caught the glow of a blush across the bridge of her nose. The toddler rolled his eyes at his parents, and then turned to return to the living room and his cartoons. "You guys are gross." Naruto laughed until he felt Hinata try to put some space between them. He looked back at her, and saw that light blush dusting the bridge of her nose as she pushed gently against his chest. He had no intention of letting her go, and tightened his arms around her waist. "What's wrong?" he asked, confused by her behavior. Hinata expertly dug a finger into a part of his side that he had previously been unaware was ticklish, and he jumped away from her. "What was that?" she asked uncertainly. Naruto felt his ears heat up as he rubbed the back of his neck bashfully. He realized suddenly that he had just kissed Hinata. She may have legally been his wife, but aside from their sleeping arrangements, any intimacy or familiarity between them had been a bit stilted to say the least. "Sorry," he told her. "I didn't mean to jump you like that." The blush across Hinata's nose darkened and spread to her whole face, and she bit her lip bashfully, her eyes dropping to examine her toes. It frustrated Naruto that he couldn't tell what she was thinking when she obviously knew his body and emotions so well. He didn't know what to say, how to explain this new possessiveness he felt toward her. He was worried she was upset with him, thinking that he was messing around with her feelings or something. "I'm not mad," she said quietly, her eyes still examining her toes. "I was just surprised. And I don't know what this means." That was something he could answer. "It means I'm not going anywhere." Her big, beautiful eyes peeked up at him from under her bangs, reading his face. "I don't remember how I ended up here, and I still don't really know what's going on, but I know I was happy. I don't want to lose that because of a stupid accident. I know Granny said I may never get my memory back, and I know it's not going to be easy, but I want to be as happy as I am in all of those pictures. And you and Jiraiya are in every one of them." "So what do we do now?" Hinata asked, her shoulders relaxing a bit. Naruto gave her a crooked grin and pulled her into his arms again, enjoying the feeling of her pressed against him. "We keep moving forward. Don't give up on me." His forehead rested against Hinata's comfortably, and her arms wrapped around his shoulders. Before he could react, she had pecked him on the lips again. He stared at her a bit surprised as a goofy grin crept across his lips and Hinata's head ducked, a bright blush on her cheeks again. Sorry, she mumbled quietly. I'm just used to kissing you. I promise I don't just walk around handing them out. He chuckled quietly, and she looked back up at him, a frown on her face still colored by her blush. It's hardly my fault, she defended. You were absolutely incapable of keeping your hands off me for the last 4 years. It's just a reaction to kiss you when you're this close. I can't help it. Naruto's small chuckle grew into a full-blown laugh and he pulled Hinata tightly to his chest. Is that why you kissed me so thoroughly the first time? He teased and laughed again when she ducked her head back down. He nudged her face back up with his nose, not wanting to move his hands from her waist, and said, You will never hear me complain about a pretty girl, who happens to be my wife, kissing me. He laughed again as her blush flared even stronger. Deciding to cut her a break, Naruto changed the subject. So, who knows about this baby? Lady Tsunade, Sakura, and my father. I've been trying to keep it from getting around until you and I came to some decision. I'm not even sure my sister knows yet, she said, biting her bottom lip as she thought. When are you due? Despite how completely out of his depth he felt, excitement was beginning to well up inside of him. He didn't remember Hinata's first pregnancy or Jiraiya's birth, and this was all new and surprising, but Naruto just felt giddy. I'm about 11 weeks, so we've got about 27 more to go. Hinata laughed at the slightly confused look Naruto gave her and said, We've got somewhere around 6 or 7 months left. Sakura set my date for September 28th. Naruto? He had to remind himself how to breathe. He was going to be a father. Somewhere in the back of his head he reminded himself he already was a father, and Jiraiya had very quickly wrapped Naruto around his finger. But again, the knowing and actually being there to watch it happen from the beginning were two very different things. Can we start telling people? He asked eagerly. Somehow, it suddenly seemed vital that he announced to everyone that Hinata was carrying his child. Naruto tried not to let the heady wave of primal masculine pride go to his head. Hinata laughed a little at his almost childlike excitement but nodded. Naruto crowed and dragged Hinata into the living room. Jiraiya had returned to his cartoons but looked up at his father, looking unmistakably startled by his outburst. Naruto swept him off the couch and into his arms, a delighted laugh escaping him. Guess what, Froggy? Naruto goaded, holding the boy to his chest with one arm and wrapping the other around Hinata's shoulders to keep her close. His body hummed when her arm wrapped around his waist tightly. He couldn't contain himself long enough for the bewildered toddler to respond and excitedly announced, You're gonna be a big brother. Jiraiya cocked his little blonde head to the side, considering this revelation. He looked to his mother smiling beside him and smiled back. What's a big brother? Hinata laughed and explained. Do you remember me explaining how Hanabi is your aunt because she is my sister? Jiraiya nodded. And do you remember me telling you that she is my sister because we have the same mother and father? Again, Jiraiya's little head bobbed up and down. Well, I'm going to have another baby, like I had you, and that baby is going to be your little brother or sister like Hanabi is to me. Jiraiya's blue eyes lit up and he began to bounce and squirm excitedly in Naruto's arms. Is that why you're going to the hospital today? To get me a baby? Naruto laughed but shook his head. No, sorry Froggy, but you're going to have to wait a while before you become a big brother. Getting a new baby takes a long time. Mama and I are going to the hospital to see if Lady Tsunade can help me feel better. Jiraiya's excited face turned solemn and he placed his little hands on Naruto's cheeks, blue meeting blue. Are you ever gonna get better, Papa? He asked softly, almost scared. Touched by the toddler's worry for him, Naruto hugged Jiraiya to his chest tightly and nodded. Yeah, buddy, I'll get better eventually. We just don't know how long it's going to take. Don't you worry though, Naruto couldn't keep his eyes from Hinata's face. I'm not going anywhere. Hinata's smile fought the worry in her eyes, but Naruto believed her smile was honest. He had said he would stay, and she knew very well that he never went back on his word. Speaking of the hospital, we are taking you to play with Hanabi and grandfather. We'd better get you over there if we want to be on time. Chapter 7. Naruto had never liked hospitals. For one, he didn't really see the point in them. His body had always healed at an exceptional rate, and the overprotective boundaries Sakura and Tsunade always limited him with every single time he was at the hospital drove him out of his mind. The idea that other people were there because they were on the verge of dying also quickly put him off. Now sitting in Sakura's small office, Naruto added a new item to his list of reasons to hate hospitals. They still had no idea what was wrong with him. Hinata sat in a chair next to his own, staring across the desk at Sakura, Tsunade, and Ino and listening carefully as they discussed possibilities. Diving into Naruto's mind won't do us any good. Even without factoring in Kurama, his mind is like a labyrinth, Ino complained once again. They had been in this meeting for nearly an hour and a half, talking in circles as they tried to brainstorm some way to cure Naruto. Even if I could get in, how am I supposed to examine memories that aren't there? If Naruto can't even find them, I won't be able to find them. Looking at his missing memories to see what made them go missing in the first place is impossible. Tsunade sighed, her manicured fingers digging into her forehead as she tried to ward off her migraine. Hinata, you are sure that nothing could have happened? She said nothing happened, Granny. Naruto's temper had finally broken from its leash. The useless talking had been grating on him since the beginning of the meeting, and Tsunade's insistence that Hinata must have missed something rankled him. Hinata was intelligent, and had always been good with details, and Tsunade's unrelenting doubt upset him. A calming hand landed on his forearm and he met Hinata's vibrant eyes, his temper abating instantly. After a significant look that told him she was grateful for his confidence in her and his defense, she turned her focus to the Hokage. No, Lady Tsunade. I've gone over everything over and over again, but I can't think of anything. There is no reason he should be unable to remember. Her voice was calm and professional, and Naruto tried to emulate her peaceful nature, violently reining in his temper. Naruto watched as Tsunade chewed on her tongue thoughtfully, working over every possibility again and again. And nothing has shown up in the past week? Nothing's been triggered? Hinata shook her head. Tsunade sighed again, before shaking her head. We've done everything we can on our end. We'll keep looking, but we may have to get used to the idea that there is no explanation. Much about the human mind and the brain is still unknown, and there is a possibility we will never know or understand what has happened to you, Naruto. Your memory may never return. Her words were like hammer blows, each one pounding the previous in a little deeper. He felt a small warm hand wrap around his and looked up to see Hinata's ever-present encouraging smile, promising him that it was okay if his memory never returned. Is that all? He asked sullenly, turning back to Tsunade. The Hokage nodded, defeated. For now, yes. We'll keep looking and you'll know as soon as we find something. Try to stay positive, okay? As soon as he was out of the hospital, Naruto lifted his face to soak up the sunshine. The heat dulled his disappointment a little and he pushed it from his mind. He felt Hinata tug on his hand and looked at her, appreciating the way the bright sunlight highlighted her skin and made her dark hair shine. Why don't we stop by the shopping district? She proposed. I think you could use some cheering up, and nothing makes you happier than new gear. We've got some time still before I told Hanabi we'd be back to get Jiraiya. Naruto couldn't hide his smile as he pulled Hinata into his arms and hugged her tightly. She seemed surprised but melted into him easily, returning his embrace with just as much affection and enthusiasm. What would I do without you, Hinata? He asked, smiling into her hair. She giggled a little and mumbled into his neck. Be a lot less confused right now, I would imagine. Naruto shrugged as he pulled away enough to see her face. Maybe, he admitted honestly. But a lot less happy. Now come on. He enthusiastically began pulling her toward the shopping district, determined to keep a light mood. I want to see how much gear has improved in the last 5 years. Contrary to popular belief, Hinata Hyuga was not the human incarnation of naivety and innocence. Despite the fact that she felt she had absolutely no ability to flirt, she could easily recognize when other women did. She had watched Ino and Sakura for years, hoping to one day be able to emulate them and catch Naruto's eye. Needless to say, it hadn't yielded many results, and Naruto had finally seen her for entirely different reasons, but even after being in a serious, safe, and encouraging relationship with him for nearly 5 years, Hinata still considered herself a miserable failure and knew that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be able to accomplish the level of professionalism that perfect specimen was exemplifying across the market with her own husband. For once, Hinata thanked Kami for Naruto's all-encompassing ignorance towards female advances. When the two had reached the shopping district, they had meandered from window to window, browsing the selection before something had caught Hinata's eye. She had stayed to examine it, and Naruto had spied something interesting a little farther down the street. With a blessing from Hinata, he had eagerly zipped down the street to look at a selection of custom kunai, the perfect image of a kid in a candy story. When Hinata had finished her own browsing, she had turned to find a woman advancing on her husband. Hinata watched from a distance as the slim-legged blonde tossed her hair and laughed, resting a hand on Naruto's arm for a moment. Despite her instincts screaming at her to march over there and send that floozy sailing for the hills, Hinata was curious to see what Naruto would do. Despite his promise to not leave her, Hinata was intensely aware of the fact that Naruto did not remember how he loved her. Being told you love someone, and actually feeling the emotion coursing through your veins were two very different things. She mused as the blonde shifted her weight, swinging her hip to the side and smiling charmingly. When the woman faked a stumble and fell against Naruto's chest, Hinata decided she'd seen enough. Why any woman would fake a clumsiness that rivaled her own natural propensity in an attempt to attract men was beyond her understanding, and Hinata quickly slipped through the throng of market-goers to put an end to it. A small frown graced Hinata's face. The woman was laying it on a little thick, she decided. Naruto had only just managed to steady her when Hinata reached them, and he smiled brightly as he greeted her. "Hey, Hinata! I was wondering where you'd run off to," he said, using her much-missed nickname as he casually looped an arm over her shoulders. Hinata was 98% sure he didn't even realize he was doing it, but since she had told him of her pregnancy that morning and he'd declared he wasn't going anywhere, he had ramped up his physical affection to almost the same level as before that awful morning on their way home from Waterfall, seemingly embracing the idea that she was, in fact, his wife of 4 years. She had a sneaking suspicion it was one of those things his body remembered but his brain didn't, and had decided not to make a fuss about it but simply bask in the warmth of his growing, or hopefully returning, affection. She wrapped an arm around his waist, settling under his arm easily, and turned her attention to the tall woman before them. She tried not to sound defensive when she politely asked, "Who is this?" "This is KDI," Naruto announced with a flourish of his hand in the woman's direction. He hadn't noticed the sour expression that flitted briefly across the woman's face, nor the way she had stiffened when he'd wrapped his arm around Hinata, but she certainly had. Hinata had sharp eyes and she hadn't missed a single nuance of the surprise, annoyance, anger, and jealousy that had rapidly flashed across the other woman's face. Hinata's fingers briefly pressed into Naruto's side a tad more firmly as she stomped down the wave of jealous possessiveness that welled up inside her, and the arm around her shoulders tightened a bit in response as he flourished at her now. "KDI, this is my wife, Hinata." "It's nice to meet you," Hinata said politely, offering her hand. KDI hesitated a fraction too long before grasping her hand. She shook it once, and then yanked her hand back to her side stiffly. "KDI's in the village trying to set up a trade agreement between us and her little village in Rice Country. She was asking if I knew any good places to set up shop, but I'm not much help, what with everything going on," Naruto continued bashfully rubbing the back of his neck, blissfully unaware of the tense atmosphere between the women. KDI's attention snapped back to Naruto, and she pointedly ignored Hinata as she flipped her hair again, smiling that charming smile. "Speaking of which, I'd better get going. Lots of work to do if we hope to get anywhere. Bye, Naru." She wiggled her fingers in a prissy little wave and winked over her shoulder as she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Naruto waved, still incredibly blind to the woman's overbearing affection, and turned his full attention to Hinata. "You about done here? We should probably get back to the compound and pick up Jiraiya. I bet he's driving your sister crazy. You okay?" His eyes clouded with concern as he noticed her furrowed expression and squeezed her shoulders gently. Hinata didn't want to seem petty and jealous, so she shook her head and dodged. "I'm just feeling a little nauseous is all, nothing to worry about." Naruto grimaced sympathetically. Man, this baby sure is sending you through the ringer, isn't it? Maybe we should go back to the hospital and have Granny take a look at you. Hinata saw her chance and she took it. If he was going to use the baby as an excuse, that was fine with her. Shaking her head, she gave him a small smile and answered, "No, I'll be fine. This is nothing compared to when I was carrying Jiraiya." It wasn't exactly a lie. You couldn't really compare morning sickness to watching some floozy drape herself all over your amnesiac husband, Hinata reasoned. The fact that Naruto had no idea she was referring to two entirely different things was neither here nor there. "I'm done. We can head to the estate." Naruto took her excuse without a second thought, and for once, Hinata thanked the fact that without his memory he couldn't read her like a book anymore as he steered her in the direction of the compound. "What the hell was that?" Katie yelled, a vein pulsing in her forehead as she shoved Ray through the door of their room. Why the hell was he still with her? You were supposed to erase her. This was the first time they had spotted Naruto in the village, and Katie was not pleased with how her encounter with him had turned out. His wife interrupting them had not been a pleasant surprise, and Ray had worried Katie would do something to blow their cover in her shock. Even so, Ray's temper flared now. "I did all I could. It's a miracle I erased as much as I did. I told you my jutsu wouldn't work. It's meant to seal away small things, like when intelligence is leaked. It was designed to lock away small sections, a few minutes, a few hours at best. You asked me to lock away years. Make him forget an entire person." Katie did not back down in the face of Ray's anger. "I wanted her gone. Out of his life. Why didn't your jutsu work?" she screeched, a crazed glint in her murky green eyes. "I don't know. The jutsu not working as we wanted could have been for any number of reasons." Ray tried to regain a calm facade, not wanting to antagonize Katie more, but this glitch was not her fault. Maybe it's because he's a Jinchuriki and he has a demon inside his head. Maybe it's because it's him. He's not exactly a normal shinobi. Maybe it didn't work because I was never very good at using it, like I told you from the beginning, or maybe it didn't work because that wasn't what the jutsu was designed to do. Fix this. Katie wailed, stamping her foot. "It's not possible," Ray yelled back. "You asked me to use a jutsu for something completely different from what it was designed for, without nearly enough preparation, from a distance, without being detected by the most powerful shinobi of our time and his sensory-type wife. The fact that it worked at all and that the seal hasn't been discovered yet is unbelievable." Not for the first time Ray cursed herself for getting involved with this radically maniac woman. But she'd had no choice. She had needed the money and Katie had made the job sound easy and innocent. Now, however, the stakes had risen and it wasn't worth it anymore. Looking up from the warp table, Ray met Katie's green eyes. "I'm done. The jutsu didn't work, and if we get caught we could be executed for treason. Naruto Uzumaki is the hero of the entire world, and messing with him is so far out of my league I never even considered you'd go this far. I should never have even tried the jutsu in the first place. It's not worth it anymore, and I'm gone." Ray stood and moved to grab her bag before walking to the door. Katie's quiet threat stopped her in her tracks. "If you don't fix this I will sell your sister myself." Ray felt as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped on her. Slowly she looked over her shoulder to meet Katie's gaze, hoping she had managed to hide her fear. "What are you talking about? I figured you might try to back out on me at some point. I found myself a security net. Your sister is back at the village, in Rice, under the careful watch of my men. At the first notice, she can be on a ship to the west. I've heard whores from the east are in high demand, something about our exotic looks or something." Ray looked at Katie's smug expression, not even bothering to hide the fear anymore. She couldn't walk out now, with her baby sister dragged into the mess. Katie knew she'd won before Ray had even dropped her bag. Hanabi was watching Jiraiya in the garden when Hinata and Naruto arrived. The toddler was fast asleep on a blanket by the pond and the shadows from the sakura tree played across his face as he slept. "Any luck?" Hanabi asked, standing and stepping through the flowers to them. Hinata felt Naruto's shoulders slump beside her, and she squeezed his hand gently as she answered her sister. "No, unfortunately not. Lady Tsunade said we may have to start thinking about accepting the possibility Naruto's memories may never return. She put on a brave face for her little sister, but inside Hinata was torn about how she really felt. On the one hand, it wasn't Naruto's fault, and she in no way blamed him. She knew he had been trying his best to remember their life together and deal with the challenges thrown at them, and she loved him all the more for his perseverance. On the other hand, the last 5 years of her life had easily been the best she had ever lived. When she was younger, she had always daydreamed about what a life with Naruto would be like. Even her most fantastic fantasies didn't hold a candle to how absolutely perfect the reality was. It hurt that she was now the only one, and may always be the only one, that remembered those times. That just makes them all the more special, she mused. Hey, Hanabi? The Hyuga sisters turned to Naruto in unison. He had spoken softly, a direct contrast to his usual boisterous levels. Both girls had learned to listen carefully when Naruto was in one of these rare moods. Yeah? Are you busy for the next few hours? The question was unexpected, and Hinata saw the surprise flash across her sister's face before she shook her head. Do you think you could watch Jiraiya for a few more hours for us? Hanabi raised an eyebrow and looked at her sister, asking what Naruto meant. Hinata simply shrugged, as confused as Hanabi. Yeah, I guess. Why? Do you guys need to go back to the hospital or something? Naruto shook his head and a smile stole across his face. No, I want to take Hinata on a date. His arm wrapped around her shoulders as he said it, and he pulled her against his side firmly. A what? She gasped. She knew her eyes must be as wide as dinner plates, but that was the last thing she had expected him to say. A date, he repeated, and Hinata did not miss the teasing in his voice. Come on, Hinata, you know what a date is, don't you? I took you on dates before, didn't I? Well, yes, of course, she sputtered, trying to catch up with him. Where was this coming from? But I didn't think you would want to go on one now. Why wouldn't I? I want to show off my pretty, pregnant wife, he exclaimed, wrapping his other arm around her and holding her tight. Your what? Hinata jumped at the outburst. She had completely forgotten Hanabi was even there. You're pregnant again? Hanabi's pale eyes were about to fall out of her sockets, and Hinata felt the blush flare in her cheeks. Oh yeah. Hanabi, guess what? Naruto obviously had no intention of making Hanabi guess anything because he forged on without any hint of a pause. Hinata's gonna have another baby. I'm gonna be a dad. When did this happen? Hanabi had barely spared Naruto a glance, her entire focus centered on her sister, as if she was seeing her for the first time. Hinata resisted the urge to fidget under her sister's penetrating stare. Naruto's arm was still around her, and she drew comfort from the heavy weight across her shoulders. A couple of months ago? She offered timidly. I didn't know until we had returned to the village, and I didn't really want it getting around. Hanabi still looked shocked, but she picked her jaw up off the grass and valiantly tried to take the news in stride, with a fair amount of success. Congratulations, she told them, still clearly bewildered. Naruto didn't seem to quite comprehend the sheer magnitude of what he had just revealed and smiled widely. Thanks, Hanabi. So, do you think you can watch Jiraiya for a little longer? Hanabi finally managed to drag her eyes away from her sister. She gave herself a small shake and then answered. Yeah, no problem. If something comes up I can leave him with Dad. Thanks. You're the best. Naruto crowed and then expertly steered Hinata out of the garden. Naruto's arm remained securely around Hinata's shoulders as he led her through the village, and Hinata didn't really know what else to do but follow him. He seemed happier than he had all week, and if taking her on a date was what it took to make him happy, Hinata wasn't going to complain. She was curious about where they were going though. Naruto, what exactly do you have in mind? She asked and was surprised, and slightly worried, when his jaunty pace faltered a little. He recovered quickly though, and his free hand rubbed the back of his neck as he smiled at her bashfully. I was thinking we could have lunch at Ichiraku's. I know it's lame, but I really wanted to do this, and I've never taken a girl on a date before, and I really wanted to take you out, and it's all I could think of without a lot of planning. His voice grew smaller the more he talked until it finally petered out, and Hinata wrapped her arm around his waist and gave a tight squeeze. It's perfect. She pulled him to a stop for a moment, and reached up on her tiptoes to place a kiss on his cheek. She only just managed to keep from giggling when his entire body tensed for a moment, and his mouth fell open, a foggy, dazzled look flooding his face with a goofy grin. His senses returned to him a moment later, and he smiled at her hopefully. Really? This is okay? He was anxious, she could tell, very much like he had been on their second date. He hadn't known enough on their first to be anxious. She laughed and nodded, pulling him down the street to continue toward the ramen stand. Of course it is, Naruto. It will be just like our first date all over again. A moment after she said it, she froze up and looked at him like she expected him to yell at her. I wasn't supposed to tell you that. Naruto jumped at the scrap of information eagerly. Wait. You mean I took you to Ichiraku's for our first date? His previous worries that she would be upset that he hadn't done something bigger were forgotten in his excitement to discover something new about their relationship. Hinata didn't answer, still looking like she had just committed a terrible crime, and Naruto sighed, looking at her seriously. It's fine, Hinata. I know Granny said you shouldn't tell me stuff in case my memory comes back, but she also said it may never come back. I want to remember us. I want to know how we started and where we went and what we did, and if you liked the birthday presents I gave you. I did give you birthday presents, right? She nodded hesitantly, and his smile returned. I want to know everything. Did you like going to Ichiraku's? She still hesitated, and Naruto took her hands in his, turning to face her. Hinata. Come on. This is going to be a lot harder if you're always walking on eggshells trying not to give anything away. She chewed on her lip for a moment more before she answered him. I like our first date. The place didn't really matter. I was just excited you had asked me to go. He grinned that adorable boyish grin and took an infinitesimal step closer to her. Really? His enthusiasm eased her anxiety, and she relaxed, returning his smile. She nodded again and laughed a little at the memory. Really? Sakura, Ino, and Tenten were less impressed. Naruto frowned now. Why the hell did they care? I didn't ask them. Hinata laughed and tugged on Naruto's hand, once again starting their walk to Ichiraku's. He fell into step behind her and laced their fingers together. They had been waiting for us to get together for years. I think we were sort of their real-life fairy tale. They weren't very happy that you had taken me to a crummy ramen stand for the date I had been waiting my entire life for. I think they must have really been upset with you because you spent nearly 3 weeks planning the picnic you took me on for our second date. And you were much more nervous about ruining something the second time. Hinata laughed to herself again, remembering Naruto anxiously shifting every 5 seconds and stumbling over himself and his words as he tried to talk. When they finally reached Ichiraku and took their seats, Tucci greeted them warmly. Hey kids! I was wondering when you two were going to come by. How was your anniversary? The man smiled widely at the couple and both looked at each other, not sure what to say. Naruto floundered for a moment before Hinata managed to cover for them. It was wonderful. I've always loved waterfall, and Naruto planned a wonderful trip. It was nice to relax for a while. Hinata spoke easily. She had come to really like Tucci and his daughter Ayam, and she spoke the truth. The trip had been wonderful. She was hyper-aware of Naruto watching her closely, soaking up the little snippets of their past. But it's always good to be home again, right? Tucci asked, smiling widely at his favorite customers. Hinata smiled in return, and Tucci jumped to business, clapping. So, the usual? The ramen stand was busier than Naruto ever remembered it being. After Pain's invasion, Tucci had taken the opportunity to expand from a small little bar to a slightly larger venue. The bar still remained. It was something of a tradition, but it had been expanded, and small tables had been set out in front of the bar, so diners could enjoy their food under the warm Konoha sky. Because Tucci and Ayam had other customers to deal with, Naruto and Hinata were allowed a small amount of privacy. So, you really like waterfall, huh? Naruto asked after slurping up some noodles. Hinata swallowed her own mouthful before answering, and Naruto reminded himself to watch his manners. Yes, I love it there. I don't know if you remember, but I have a water nature affinity and waterfall is like a whole other world. I know it's silly, but it just feels different to be so surrounded by my chakra nature like that. You took me there for our honeymoon. Naruto watched, enchanted by the way Hinata's eyes lit up when she spoke. He hadn't known her nature affinity was water, but it made sense. It showed itself in her calm and flowing nature. He did not miss the small tidbit about their past, either, and he carefully filed it away. Naruto's earlier prodding that Hinata couldn't keep walking on eggshells afraid of letting anything slip seemed to have done wonders. As they ate, he asked any question he could think of and Hinata answered readily. When they finished, Naruto asked for the bill, but Tsuchi waved him off. On the house, he announced, wiping his hands on a dishcloth. When Naruto began to protest, Tsuchi shook his head firmly. Consider it an anniversary gift, he suggested, and then turned away to make more ramen. Naruto looked at Hinata, who was watching him with raised eyebrows, and shrugged. He offered her his hand, which she took readily, and together they stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. They began meandering back up the main street to return to the compound, their hands swinging lightly between them, when Naruto caught sight of a familiar flash of white hair. Kakashi, accompanied by Yamato and Sai, was walking in the opposite direction, from the Hokage Tower, and he smiled through his mask at the couple and waved. Hey, you two, he greeted cheerfully, his one visible eye smiling at them. Yamato and Sai looked upset about something, but Kakashi's easy manner didn't seem affected by them. Back from your trip? Yeah, did you guys just get back from your mission? Naruto asked, eyeing their Anbu gear. Indeed we did, Naruto. We just finished reporting to Lady Tsunade, in fact. I was going to request Hinata's assistance for a follow-up mission, but I was informed that you were on leave. Kakashi's mood remained light and easy as he directed the question to Hinata, but there was an underlying tone that implied he knew more than his words said. Hinata blushed a little at his indirect directness, but nodded. Yes, I've been put on maternity leave. Oh yeah. Guess what, Kakashi-sensei? Naruto interrupted excitedly. Hinata's going to have a baby. My baby. I was also informed that you couldn't take her place on the mission because you were having some problems of your own. Kakashi's response was smooth and fluid, but carried a steel, and Naruto's excitement faltered instantly. She told you about that? He asked in a small voice, and Hinata squeezed his hand, still laced with hers, and leaned into his arm in support. She did, Kakashi confirmed, his smile now gone as he watched Naruto closely. He waited a moment for Naruto to meet his eye, but when the younger man didn't, Kakashi spoke again, this time, his voice softer. Are you okay? The question was more than a simple inquiry into Naruto's well-being. Kakashi was asking if Naruto was managing to keep up with all of the surprises flying at him. How was he handling everything? Naruto looked up at his trusted teacher, and a small smile, one of his real, honest smiles that still managed to show the pain he was working through, lifted the corner of his mouth. Yeah, he answered, turning to Hinata and wrapping an arm around her shoulder. Yeah, I am. I've got Hinata here. Hinata smiled back at him warmly, her arm wrapping tightly around his waist in return, before the couple looked back to Kakashi, Yamato, and Sai. Then I'll leave it at that, Kakashi said, his smile returning. Wait, you don't have some sort of jutsu that will help? Naruto asked anxiously. Kakashi shook his head, his hands buried in his pockets. I'm afraid not. The jutsu I have copied have been almost strictly combat-oriented. I always left the mind games to men like Ibiki and Inoichi. When Naruto turned to Yamato and Sai, both still standing patiently a step behind Kakashi, the Jonin stopped him. Yamato and Sai won't be much help either. They've both had their own troubles with memories running amok. I'm sorry, Naruto, but in this, your team won't be much help. Naruto's shoulders slumped, but he nodded in understanding. Yamato stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder encouragingly. We may not hold the answers you need, but we'll be here if there's anything we can do, Naruto. Naruto's eyes met Yamato's and he smiled in thanks. Yeah. I know. Thanks, Yamato. Perhaps feeling the need to personally offer his own support, Sai stepped forward as well, one of his practiced smiles in place. Yes, Naruto. If you find you are incapable of accomplishing the things your forgotten self has laid the groundwork for, we will be here to help. I would consider it a great honor to help a friend in need. If you decide you cannot properly care for your wife or son. Yamato's hand slapped over Sai's mouth, and he quickly made an excuse. I think Sai is a little beat from the mission. I'll take him home, he announced before quickly steering the younger shinobi away. Naruto's arm had tightened around Hinata's shoulder at Sai's words, and he glared after the pair quickly disappearing down the street. I see he's changed about as much as Sasuke, he muttered sarcastically. He means well, Kakashi replied. Congratulations, Hinata, on your pregnancy. I wish you all the best. Now if you don't mind, I'm going to follow Yamato's advice and head home. Later. And with a cheerful wave, Kakashi poofed out of sight. Hinata waited for a moment, watching as Naruto stared at the place Kakashi had been, and tightened the arm around his waist. Are you okay? She asked softly. Heaving a sigh, Naruto met her eyes and smiled that small little smile again. Yeah, I'm good. I know I shouldn't be surprised, but I was kind of hoping Kakashi would have an answer for all of this when he came home. He just knows so much. I thought for sure he would have something. We should get back. Jiraiya will be wondering where we ran off to. He made to continue down the road and Hinata followed him, allowing him his silence until they had nearly arrived at the compound. Just before they turned the corner, she pulled him to the side and stopped. Naruto looked down at her, confused, but Hinata didn't explain herself. Slowly, making sure not to startle him, and maybe to give him time to refuse, Hinata placed her hands on both of his cheeks, cradling his face gently, and rose on her toes to place a kiss on his lips. For his part, Naruto stood very, very still for a moment, as if he was afraid she would stop if he reacted, but he couldn't stop himself from kissing her back. Just as in the kitchen, Naruto's body remembered what to do and took over for his brain. His hands rose to her waist, pulling her flush against him and taking some of her weight off of her toes so she didn't have to stretch so much. If he also did it because he wanted to hold her closer, what did it matter? The kiss was gentler than the one in the kitchen, which had been fueled by surprise on Hinata's part and a desperation on Naruto's, and that had been cut drastically shorter than either would have preferred by their son. This kiss was slow, unhurried, as Naruto enjoyed the feeling of Hinata's lips working against his insistently, and he paid careful attention to what she was doing, trying to copy it. Her fingers were playing with his hair, and he hummed quietly against her lips at the light tugging. She pulled away first, leaving him in a slight daze as he stared down at her. Thank you? I had a wonderful time today, she said, her arms wrapped comfortably around his neck. His chest swelled with a masculine pride and he set her back on her feet, although he didn't let go. And he didn't plan on letting go if he could help it. Later that night, Naruto sat on the couch, Jiraiya curled against his chest as he read a children's book to him. Hinata was preparing an early dinner in the kitchen when the peaceful evening was interrupted by heavy pounding on the front door. Before either Hinata or Naruto could move to answer it, the front door slammed open and Kiba Inuzuka triumphantly marched into the small apartment followed by Shino, Shikamaru, Choji, Sasuke, Sai, and Lee. Yo, Naruto! Kiba bellowed. He ruffled Jiraiya's blonde hair after slapping Naruto on the shoulder roughly. Do you have to be so damn loud, Kiba? Naruto complained, shrugging the dogman's hand off. By this time, Hinata had stepped out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. Language, Naruto, she chided softly, reminding him with a look that Jiraiya was present, before looking at the assembly in her living room. What's going on, Kiba? She asked curiously. We are here to collect your husband, Kiba announced, wrapping an arm around her shoulders in a brotherly hug. Collect? Naruto parroted, sounding annoyed as Jiraiya shifted in his arms, startled by the unexpected crowd. It is our men's night out, and seeing as you missed out on our gathering last week, we feel it is only right we make sure you attend tonight, Dickless, Sai offered helpfully. Naruto vaguely wondered if it was a blessing or a curse that Sai had not changed. Naruto chaffed at the old nickname, resisting the urge to sock the artist in the face. I thought you stopped calling me that after Hinata got pregnant with Jiraiya, he complained. He had quizzed Hinata most of the afternoon about his relations with each of his friends specifically, focusing a lot of attention on his teammates. Sai smiled back at him and nodded. Yes, I did. But I figured the name fit again, seeing as you don't remember conceiving about 4 different fists slammed into Sai roughly and a hand slapped over his mouth before he could finish his sentence, all of the men glancing warily at Hinata. A light blush dusted her cheeks, but she sucked in a deep breath and took it in stride, deciding not to comment on the details of her and Naruto's sex life in front of the men she'd known since childhood. Froggy, can you go play in your room for a bit? She asked. The toddler nodded, and after Naruto lowered him to the floor, he waved at all of his uncles and dashed into his room. She tactfully changed the subject back to the matter at hand. You want to take him bar hopping? She directed her question to the more sensible men, Shikamaru, Shino, and Sasuke. Shikamaru was the one that answered, shaking his head. No, we decided we'd start him off with something a little easier. We're going to Kiba's apartment, and we're just going to play cards, drink a little, and talk. Hinata looked skeptical, and Kiba rushed to hold his ground. Come on, Hinata. Tsunade said he should do all of the normal stuff, and game night is normal. We're even all in the village. That doesn't happen that often. Hey, who said I want to go play dumb old cards with you guys in the first place? Naruto demanded, rising from the couch and moving to stand by Hinata. No, I think you should go, she said as he wrapped his arm around her shoulder. He gaped at her for a moment, and she looked back at the men crowded into her small apartment. Boys, can you give us a minute? She asked sweetly, and without a word, the men nodded and filed out the door. Turning back to Naruto, Hinata looked him in the eye. I think this is a good idea. He shot her a skeptical look, and was about to give his rebuttal, but Hinata held up her hand and rushed forward. You were just saying this afternoon that you wished you didn't have to rely on me for everything. I don't mind, but if you want to stop relying on me, you're going to have to go off on your own. I think it would be good for you to spend time with all the boys as a group. Maybe it will jog something. Naruto grimaced. He had been looking forward to a quiet night at home with Hinata and Jiraiya. He had decided he was going to start at square one with their relationship. He was going to try to fall in love with her again, and the next step after their date earlier that day, in his mind, was to spend a night in with her. He wouldn't have to worry about saying something stupid because he didn't remember something, or pretending that his still MIA memories didn't upset him. He could just wrap himself around Hinata and watch a movie or something. At the same time, the idea of spending time with the guys was somewhat tempting, and he reasoned that perhaps he could pump them for information about their relationship and Hinata in general. The last time he had spent time with all of them had been on a battlefield glaring down Madara. That you remember, he reminded himself darkly. Are you sure? He asked again, hoping she would change her mind. I promised Jiraiya I would play a game with him. Hinata nodded confidently. I'll distract him. This will be good. You go ahead. She laid a hand on his chest reassuringly, and Naruto hesitated a moment before timidly lowering his head to hers. He brushed his lips lightly against hers, a thrill rushing through him when she kissed him back. Okay, if you're sure, he tried one last time. When she nodded, he dismally accepted his fate. I'll go say bye to Jiraiya. It hadn't been very late when Naruto had left the apartment with the boys, accompanied by enthusiastic cheering and backslapping. There was still a while before the sun set, and in order to distract Jiraiya from his father's sudden absence, Hinata had offered to take him to the park. The toddler had enthusiastically agreed, dragging his mother to the door and tugging on his shoes. Hinata kept one eye on Jiraiya as he scrambled around the playground, but couldn't keep her mind from straying to Naruto. She hoped the boys weren't being too rough with him. It had only been a little over a week since his memory had disappeared, but Hinata knew the men of the Konoha 12 would have little sympathy. She just hoped her husband would be returned to her in one piece. Help, please. I need your help. It's my sister. The ragged scream pulled her from her thoughts. Hinata couldn't hide the surprise on her face as a young woman burst out of the woods and sprinted toward her, and all thoughts of Naruto were driven from her mind. In an instant, Hinata took in details and saw that the woman was maybe only a few years older than herself. She had coppery hair pulled into a bun at the back of her head, and was about average height. Hinata had never seen her before, but there was no denying the panic in the brown eyes. Please! The woman reached her and took Hinata firmly by the shoulders. Please, it's my sister, she's hurt and I don't know what to do. Hinata's calm shinobi demeanor kicked in. Speaking in a soothing voice, she gently removed the hysterical woman's hands from her shoulders. Calm down and explain what's going on. I'm a shinobi, I can help, but I need you to stay calm and tell me what happened. Hinata shifted, putting herself between the young woman and her son as the toddler watched on from the swings. She didn't think this stranger posed much of a threat, but it never hurt to be cautious. We were playing in the forest. She was climbing trees and she fell. She screamed and then passed out. I didn't dare move her. I think something happened to her back. Please, please help me, she begged, tears shining in her eyes. Okay, everything is going to be okay. I know some medical jutsu. If you take me to her, I can help and then we'll get her to the hospital, okay? The woman nodded frantically and then began tugging Hinata toward the trees. Hinata resisted and called Jiraiya to her. Froggy, come here. The toddler tore his wide blue eyes away from the woman and ran to his mother as fast as he could. He wrapped his arms around her tightly when she lifted him to her hip. Mama, what's wrong with her? He asked in a quiet voice, looking scared. Her little sister was hurt, and she's worried. We're going to go help, okay? Hinata told him, smoothing down his wild blonde hair in an effort to comfort him as she followed the still frantic woman at a quick pace. Everything's going to be okay, she promised him as he buried his face in her shoulder, shaking just a little. Hinata fought down the protective urge that welled up inside her. She hated worrying her son, but there was nothing for it. Someone needed help and Hinata didn't have time to get someone else to watch him. The anxious woman led Hinata through the trees quickly, pushing their pace to a jog in some places, and as the sky overhead began to darken further, uneasiness began to simmer inside her. She was about to question the woman just how far into the woods she and her sister had been playing when the trees suddenly broke into a clearing. Against the far side, backed by more trees, stood a ragged shack. Hinata's instincts screamed for her to run and her Byakugan flared to life, searching the clearing for an injured girl as she held Jiraiya just a bit tighter. What's going on? She asked in a low voice. Hinata's guide had stopped, her back still facing Hinata, and she flinched at the question. When she turned, the panicked, frantic look in her eye had been replaced with regret, sorrow, and an apology. My sister really is in trouble, she said, her voice wavering slightly. And the only way I can save her is to bring you here. I'm sorry. Hinata's Byakugan caught a flash from behind her right before an arrow slammed into the back of her shoulder and darkness took over.